we good? All right. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us after lunch. I realize this is a big hill after lunch. My name is Michelle Kokolas. I'm a program manager at the Environmental Finance Center. In the back is my coworker, Natalia, also a program manager at the Environmental Finance Center. Recognize some of you from previous sessions, but since there are just a couple of us in the room, can we do just a real quick intro, who you are, where you're from, and then we'll dive into the meat of the presentation. So.
I'm Diane Whitner, and I'm from, I live in Baltimore now, and I have a small business that's a zero-waste business called Ecotopia, LLC, and a project about the transportation we need in Maryland called Fix Maryland Rail.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Eloisa Trinidad. I'm the Executive Director at Chili Some Meals. I am from New York City, and at Chili Some Meals we work at the intersection of food sovereignty, food access, and environmental justice as it relates to food systems.
Great, thank you. Next.
Hi, sorry, my name is Sinai Emanuel. I'm currently free agent, no longer with an organization. But yeah, I'm based in Southeast DC. In the past, done a lot of environmental justice work across the state of Maryland. I was based in New Jersey.
Thank you.
Chad Martin, North Carolina Black Alliance, environmental justice policy strategist against the lab, who is Clean Equity Fellows together, and I actually live in Virginia.
Great, thank you. All right, go ahead. So what we're going to be talking about today is RFPs, requests for proposals, when you should do them and when you should pass on them. So we've actually developed an RFP analysis tool that we're going to walk through step by step today, which is why we have so many slides. And then we're going to do a little bit deeper dive into some specific considerations for folks. And then we're actually going to walk through an open RFP that's out right now and demonstrate some of the steps that we have outlined in the tool. And so we're going to be talking about as we go through the tool, we'll be talking about those things, but that also a little bit more consideration to things like, when do you need a partnership? How do you form a partnership? When's it important? When it isn't? And then we're going to be walking through the Green and Healthy Homes initiative that just came out a week or so ago. So as I said, this is a tool that you can get for free online. You can access it through the Environmental Finance Center network or through our website, which is up there and very hard to read. There's a link to it. And this is sort of like a...
RFPtool.unm.edu.
I mean, if you have ever used like a plant key or a choose your own adventure book, that's kind of how this is set up. It's a series of questions. You answer yes or no to them, and then depending on how you answer, it takes you to a different place. So you can go forward, you can go backward. It's really simple and easy to use. And we developed it to help organizations and local governments decide if a request for a proposal, an RFP, is a good fit for them. That's one of the questions we get most often. It's like, how do I know if I should even do this? And quite honestly, it's a question we ask ourselves all the time. And so what you do to work your way through it, you click on a button, either an arrow in the bottom right corner or an answer to a question, and it's going to take you to the next question and choose your own adventure. Choose your own adventure. So.
Do you want to explain, when you access the tool online, it works exactly the same, but
it just looks different. Different color scheme and graphics and stuff. But
Mexico changed our colors on us, but it's all the same.
Okay. So the purpose of this is really this big question, right? Like you see some sort of announcement come out, a request for proposal, and you immediately start thinking about it, right? Like, does my project fit? Do I have time? Should I do this? Is it worth the effort? All of those things. And so that is the genesis of this tool. We want to address the questions of, do we have a project that fits? Can we do the work for the amount of money that is available? Do we have the time to write the proposal? And some other questions. And the important takeaway from this is that it's easy to fall down the rabbit hole of chasing money, and chasing money is never the right answer. If you're chasing it because it is there, but it doesn't really make sense, it's not a good use of your time. And so there are three common reasons why we're asking these questions. why you shouldn't pursue an RFP. You don't have enough time to read it, yet alone write the proposal. You read the RFP and you start to write, but then you realize you're in over your head, you didn't understand all of the requirements, and you don't know who to partner with. Like, those are the three most common issues that we encounter and that people come to us with.
Do those sound familiar? Any other ones that you guys come across? No?
I mean, I think the one that I come across is the requirements part. Oftentimes some agencies are able to take advantage of certain grants, some aren't, or some organizations aren't. I think the requirements part is
Yeah.
something that like leads to a lot of organizations not applying for it. And also just not knowing, are you eligible to take advantage of these things? That's
Yeah.
a challenge.
We're going to talk about requirements somewhere in here.
Yeah, and I think perhaps this is what you were saying, but just the amount of work that goes into it. I mean, I think that that's what's so inequitable about RFPs, right?
Right.
We want, like, these community-based organizations to apply, and then applying will be like a 1 week, 2 week process if you don't have a grant writing team.
Yeah.
And
For
you
the
have to work
record,
during those 1 or 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Right.
For the record, Natalia and I both used to work at nonprofits, so we are very familiar with that. We're just on a slightly different side of it now, but we also are 100% soft funded, so we are also constantly writing grants on our own as well. So the first question is, like, how do we know if this grant is a good fit for us? You need to answer that question before you start going into this process. So step one is to evaluate the basic requirements of the RFP. You want to avoid the tendency to dive into an application before you fully evaluated it to see if it's a good fit. A lot of times you jump in before evaluating it, and the result is a lot of wasted time and effort and frustration. So the question, how do you know if it is a good fit or not? Before diving into the details of multiple pages of questions and requirements, you want to start by looking at 2 key items. The first question is, are we a qualified applicant? Every RFP somewhere within the first couple of pages is going to say, these are the eligible entities for this opportunity. You want to start there. Is it open to nonprofits? Is it open to universities? Who are the eligible applicants? And answer that question, yes or no. And so for the first one, we're going to show you what happens with both of them, but then moving forward, we're just going to go through the yeses for the most part. So if you look at that list of qualified applicants and you are a community-based organization, a 501c3, and they are not an eligible applicant, your answer is no. And then the next question you should ask yourself is, can we work with a partner who is an eligible applicant? If the answer is no,
It's gonna say don't apply.
then the answer is this is not a good fit for you. If you say yes, then great. First question answered, we can apply for this somehow. So you're an eligible applicant, then you need to look at the proposal deadline. It's probably, in my opinion, the next most important thing you want to look at. You need to consider, do you have time to gather all of the required documentation? Can you secure any funding approvals that you need, like any requirement approvals to proceed? And if you need a partner or you want a partner, is there time to line those partners up to obtain your letters of support, to do all the things that you need to do? And after all of that, you still need to have enough time to actually write the proposal. So evaluating when that proposal deadline is and if you think you have the time to do all of these things is the next thing you need to think about. So I feel like we did something different than our slides up here say, but so can we realistically submit a proposal by the due date? Let's say yes. The answer is yes. If the answer is no, obviously the answer is no. But if the answer is yes, so after you determine that the timeline is achievable, there's still 2 basic questions to consider before you actually dive deeper into the RFP, and certainly before you start writing. The first one is, what is the return on investment? And the second one is, do you have capacity? So is the amount of time and effort that goes into writing a proposal worth it for the amount of funding that is available? And I think this is a really important question, that you need to think about all the things on the back end, right? Like, so for example, we work at the University of Maryland. They take a huge amount of overhead off of any proposal that we submit. And so if a proposal is going to be for less than $20,000, $25,000, we don't even pursue it because the amount of money we're going to get out of it isn't worth the effort of us writing it. And so there's things you need to think about on the back end for your individual organization and whether or not that makes sense. I think especially thinking about, do you need to have a partner? Because if it's a small amount of money and you're going to have a partner and you're going to lose half or a third of that money to your partner, is it worth the money for you to spend the time writing this proposal? So if you say yes, then the next question is, do you have the capacity? And this means not only thinking about the capacity and skills required to write the proposal, but also, do you have the capacity to manage the grant and complete the project if funded? So meaning, like, do you have the financial capabilities of managing the money? Do you have the staff to complete the work? Do you have somebody who can oversee your project partner? Do you have the internal capacity to manage all aspects of this project in addition to having the capacity to write it? So two different types of capacity to think about. So if you say yes, we think we have the capacity, great, it looks like you fit the basic requirements for this RFP. This is when we start diving into some of the deeper questions. So Natalia and I are going to play tag because we have a lot of slides. So we'll take turns talking.
We're getting our steps in today, that's all. So for step one, we barely even looked at the RFP, right? This was more internally, how much is the amount of money? How much time is it going to take me to pull all of this together? In step two, you really start to think about, is your project a good fit? So what are they looking to fund? What type of projects are they looking for? What are the goals of the funding opportunity? And determining if the two, what you want to do and what those opportunities are have a good overlap. So if you qualify, we've determined we qualify, we have ample time, we have the capacity, we're going to get enough return on investment. The next step is to actually read the RFP a little bit more closely to determine that your project meets the criteria. So if you try to force a project into an RFP where it doesn't fit, chances are that it'll show, and that's going to result in you unfortunately wasting probably a good amount of time and having a bit of frustration. So most RFPs have several project categories, each with specific requirements, and it's really important that you carefully review all of the requirements, ensuring that your project checks all of the required boxes. So right now, one of the big funding opportunities that we're seeing is the community change grant that has mapping requirements. So do you fit within the areas that they are looking to fund projects? Very easy first step. Yes or no, very easy elimination. If you're trying to do more like water quality-based projects, maybe air quality-based projects, are you able to demonstrate nutrient reduction calculations or metrics that this project will be effective? Because that is what is going to make a compelling proposal. If you're looking to put things in the ground, plant trees, any of that, do you have do you have permission to be putting things where you want to put them? And do you have the capacity to get those permissions in place? Some projects will require permitting, and those obviously the permitting process is what it is, and that takes time. And then some grants actually require a pre-application site visit with the funders. Even if it's not required, we always recommend it. So after determining what the requirements are, the next question you're going to ask yourself is, can we meet all of the criteria listed for the type of project that we want to do? Do you have the internal capacity, or do you have partners in place to fill gaps? And do you have the time to actually get all of the pieces of the proposal done, right? So if we do, the next thing we want to ask about are partners. So regardless of whether you answered yes or no to the previous question, whether you need a partner, a lot of times it can make a really effective bonus to your application. When you're competing against different people, really try and think critically about what some of your weaknesses may be. And if you know of a partner organization that you've worked with before that can fill that gap, that's really important. So if collaboration is needed to meet a requirement or to strengthen a project, reach out early in the proposal development process. You need to ensure that the partners can work within the existing timeline to provide any information, letters of support. This is especially true if you're having them write certain parts of a proposal. So a lot of times the proposals will be broken up into sections, and depending who's doing what, the writing may fall on different entities. And you need to be upfront and clear about who's doing what and make sure we have plenty of time to get those done. All right. So after thinking about the partnership piece, you have to determine, can we do the work in-house or do we need a partner? So I think we, for the demonstration purposes, are going to decide we can do everything in-house. Okay. So for example, when might we need a partner? And we'll talk about this in a little more detail later, but like if only 501c3s or local governments can apply and I'm a university, I need to obviously get that partnership piece in place. So
I think also with community retained grants, because we've been talking about those a lot, partnerships are required. So you have to also look at whether it's a requirement of the fund.
that's true, yeah. So go ahead and click on We Are Qualified for me. Sorry, navigation-wise. Here we go. So if a contractor is required, this is not a partner that you're writing in. This is someone that you're bringing in to do specific things. I always think of this as like an engineer or a designer for these types of projects. That is not a skill set that I have. That is something that will need to be contracted out. You really need to look at the request for proposals and determine, do they have a certain bidding process that you have to follow, and can you follow it? Or do you internally have a bidding process that you need to follow, and do you have enough time to follow it, and all of those considerations? Or there are certain opportunities. I know Michelle and I have worked with enough, different organizations and groups where we know who we want to work with, so can we direct hire somebody, or is bidding really going to be required? A lot of times it's a quantity of money threshold. Like if a contract is under a certain amount, you may not have to do a bidding process. If it's over a certain amount, you may have to. So you just need to be aware of those requirements, both internally to your organization, but specifically if the funder has specific requirements in place, you need to think about and consider those. So let's say we do have to get bids for this one. That's not a problem. You just need to keep this in mind. So it's going to add several weeks to get to your project's timeline. You need to advertise it. You need to get answers back. You may want to interview folks who submitted proposals. You may have questions. So you just need to be aware of the process and the time that it's going to take. All right. When thinking about the partnership piece, do you have an existing partner? So right now, Michelle and I are working on a project where the communities that we're working with are 40% Latino. So we need people that speak Spanish. Do we know organizations in these communities that can do translation services, that can offer events in Spanish? Or do we have to identify someone? Because that is also going to be time consuming. So I'm going to say, let's say existing here, because we did happen to have an existing one here, but just things to think about. Like we said, this is a choose your own adventure, so the next thing the tool will prompt you to is, great, it seems like your project is still a good fit. You have the capacity to do everything in-house, or you have the capacity to bring on partners. It's also really important at this point, once you've kind of gone through that fact-finding mission, that you start reviewing the narrative questions to make sure either you or your partners can address them. And if there are any evaluation criteria included in the RFP, pay close attention to the scoring system, ensuring that the most effort is given to the sections with the highest potential. We all wish we had infinite amounts of time and resources to devote to grant writing, but unfortunately we don't. So where should we really be focusing our time, and where is it okay if we maybe have to cut a few corners? It would be okay to do it in this section. So some other things to think about as you review the RFP. I think this is really good advice. This is the process I follow. You want to be making 2 lists. One is your internal checklist of all of the required documentation and information needed for the proposal. So this is just to even hit submit, these are all the things I have to do. The other one is any questions you have. As you're reading that RFP, you're going to have questions. You may have questions about whether your project fills all points of the program. You may have questions about how things are written. Maybe things are unclear. But it's worth, as you're going through, keeping a list of all of those questions. And if you don't think you can meet all of the requirements, now may be a good time to stop and reconsider moving ahead. But if you decide to proceed, the next step is
I do want to go back to bids for just a second because I think that that's a really nuanced thing with proposals. And for example, community change grants, it's a federal opportunity. If you're having to get bids, regardless of whether your organization has a bid process, which a lot of small organizations don't, your process may not meet the requirements of the RFP. And so you need to make sure that even if you have an internal bid process, that it checks all the boxes of the funder, because sometimes it may not. It's also worth talking to the funder about bids sometimes, because we write a lot of partners into proposals, and oftentimes you need some sort of estimate for your line item, right? Like you maybe can't go through the whole bid process before the proposal is due, but you still need to have some sort of idea of how much money that project is going to cost you. So a lot of funders will let you get a bid to use in your budget as a cost estimate for that line item, and then let you get the rest of the bids if you are awarded, and then you can justify which of those entities you want to use. I will also say that in most bid processes for RFPs, you're not necessarily required to go with the cheapest one. If you can justify why you want to use somebody that maybe somebody costs a little bit more, but they're a small, locally owned woman business, they're gonna give credit for that, and like they'll allow you to use that bidder even if it's maybe not the cheapest one. So it's a very nuanced process worth reaching out to your funder about. Yes?
You made me think, even if you're a nonprofit and you partner with local government, they might have requirements that they might have to bid for them.
They may. And I will also say, a lot of times local governments like working with nonprofits, because if you are the applicant on the proposal, it can help get them around their bid requirements. They maybe a local government may only be able to contract with people that are pre-approved to work with them, but if you are the holder of the money, you may be able to circumvent that. So local governments like to work with nonprofits for that reason. It eliminates some red tape. So after you've done all this, the next step is you want to reach out to the funder.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's really important that you don't underestimate the importance of this step. Some RFPs require this. If you are working with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, they now require you to have a conversation with them before you can submit your proposal. Other places, they say we're available if you have questions. The bottom line is funders want to talk to you before they get your application, even if they don't require it, because they want to make sure the applications that they are getting in are the best fit for the dollars that they have. And oftentimes you might think that your project is a good fit for a certain application, and when you talk to the funder, especially if it's a funder like the Chesapeake Bay Trust, for example, they have tons of different programming options. They may say to you, you could apply for this under this funding, but actually I think you'd be more competitive in this grant program. And so even if it's not required, we highly recommend that you reach out to the funder. We ourselves do this. And the other thing that's important about it is even if they don't really give you a whole lot of valuable feedback, they're like, yeah, this sounds like a great fit for this project. We don't really have any recommendations for you. What you have done is you have put your project on their radar. So when it is submitted, They know that it's coming. They've already heard about it, and they're like, oh, this person took the time to reach out to us before they applied. So it gives you just a little more credibility with the funder. And this is where that list of questions comes into play. As you've been working your way through your proposal, and we suggest you reach out to the funder early on in the process, not like in the 11th hour, you know, it gives you a chance to ask them those questions that you have identified as you read through the RFP and get their feedback on them. Next slide, or next, whatever. So we're done with all the questions. You've answered all the questions. You know you're an applicant, eligible applicant. You're going to write the proposal. So what's left is to actually write the thing. So the rest of this tool provides 7 tips that we find helpful for setting yourself up for success during the rest of the application process. So the first thing you want to do is clearly establish a project team and a project lead. So if you are using project partners, you want to establish a point of contact with each of those partners. So you know, who is my point of contact? Who do I have questions for? If we are going to have our partner write a specific part of the proposal, who do we send that to? If we need a letter of commitment, we need a scope of work, who is my point of contact at that organization? Very important. The next thing you want to do is clearly identify the information that you are requiring from your partners. So based on the proposal and how you're setting things up, this could include, as I said, letters of support. It could be resumes for the people that you're working with. You may want them to develop some proposal content for your narrative. You might need a scope of work and budget from them. So it's really important to think about what information you need from them, especially if you want them to write something. Because a lot of times when we're identifying a partner, it's because we need to fill a gap, right? And so, for example, the project that Natalia referenced, where we're working with some Latino communities, we made our partner that's going to be doing that outreach to those communities write that part of our narrative to describe what we're doing, because we don't know what they're doing, they're doing it. And so we had them write it, and then we fit it into our total narrative where appropriate. So if you're not a landscape architect, you shouldn't be writing about developing a planting plan. You should have your landscape architect write that. So really important to think about what you want them to do and what information you are going to need from them. And then delegate your tasks. So when possible, tasks should be related to your team members' strengths, whether it's internal team members or external team members. So in other words, a field technician may be better suited to develop some text related to a methodology, but you wouldn't ask them to develop the budget. You might say to them, are there key things you need that we need to include in the budget, but you're not going to have them do all of your personnel time and your mileage and all of those sorts of things. So tasks should be delegated to partners also if and when necessary. The 5th one is to set deadlines and check-ins with your internal project team, as well as your partners throughout the application period. Especially looking at the deadline. With us at the university, we have to submit our applications to the university two weeks before the funder wants them, so that the university has time to read and approve the application. So we have to backstep everything 2 weeks from the deadline, which means if I have a project partner, I want all of my information from them at least a week to a week and a half before my deadline, so I have time to make sure they've given me everything I need, I can fit it in there. And so really thinking about your deadlines and check-ins along the way, because you don't want to get to the 11th hour and be like, I still don't have a letter of support from this important project partner. So I think this is a really critical step that people leave amiss. And set your final due date to be several days prior to the required submission date. This gives you some wiggle room for making final edits, receiving last-minute letters of support, making a last-minute tweak to your budget as well.
Another thing about this, if you don't
That's the next
Oh,
slide.
is that the next one? Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Sorry.
So as Natalia was saying, don't wait until the final hour on the last day to submit. In this day and age, most applications are submitted through some sort of online portal. It's very rare that you are actually going to submit a paper copy of an application. It does still happen until like within the last year, the District of Columbia required you to hand them 5 printed copies of your application. They have now changed and you can email it to them. But so most grant funders have an online portal, and those systems become very bogged down. And so if it's due at 4 o'clock and you are logging in at 3:55, it might not happen for you. Their system could crash. You could have all sorts of problems. This actually just happened with the Chesapeake Bay Trust about a month ago. I got an email from them that was like, hey, we're having lots of problems with the portal. So like, please don't wait because people are having issues. So don't wait until the final hour on the last day to hit submit, because they are if there's one thing they are very, very strict about this. And if it's due at 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, at 4 o'clock and 0 seconds, that portal shuts down and you will not get it in. The other important thing to know about them is once you have hit submit in a portal, you cannot get it back. So if for some reason you're working in a system, most of them have fail-safes inside and it'll tell you like you can't submit because you didn't upload this document or something. That's not always the case. And if you happen to submit a proposal that is missing pieces of information, you cannot recall it, you cannot resubmit it. So you've just submitted something that you've spent all of this time and effort on that they're not going to look at because it's incomplete. So now you have submitted your proposal. Congratulations, you made it through the portal, you hit all the right buttons. So then there's a couple final things you want to consider. If you are funded, you need to pay close attention to any contingencies associated with the award. Meaning sometimes, the Chesapeake Bay Trust does this all the time, so I'll use them as an example. You get an email from them, it says congratulations, you've been funded, it has an attachment that is your grant agreement, and in that grant agreement, it may have contingencies. And those contingencies could be any number of things. It might be, for us, a lot of the time, one of the contingencies is you still have an outstanding report from something else that's not even usually us, it's some other entity at the University of Maryland. So we just have to email them and be like, that's not us, you know. Sometimes it may say like, we want to talk to you about a line item in your budget, or it may say you have to provide them some other type of documentation. A lot of times, one of your contingencies is also that you have to have a kickoff meeting with the funder. That's all going to be identified in that grant agreement. They usually have timelines. If you don't meet them, they can say they're not going to give you the money. The other thing that's really important, and I think a lot of people don't take this opportunity, if you get that email and it says, we're sorry you weren't funded, right? Like we had 800 applicants and $100,000, whatever. You need to, even if they don't offer this, you need to reach out to them and schedule a conversation to get feedback about why you weren't funded. Was it an issue with, we just ran out of money? Your proposal was great, but we just ran out of money. Or was it, we had questions about your budget? Like all of these systems use real people to review these things. And so they have lists of comments. And if you reach out to them, they're going to share them with you. And then an important question to ask when you reach out is like, should we resubmit this next time? Or would it fit better under a different pot of funding? Or what could we do differently to make this a better reviewed proposal the next time around? So don't neglect I know no one wants to hear what sucked about your proposal, but I think that this is a really important step that most people don't take advantage of.
So that's the end of the tool. If we had said no to any of those kind of previous questions, this is the slide or the answer that would have come up. Like this isn't a good fit for you, so I'm just gonna skip right along. So again, because we were using the tool to demonstrate kind of the thought process that we use that has worked for us. We didn't get to dive into some particular things like the bid process. One of the things we didn't get to dive into we talked about it a bit, but we didn't probably do a deep dive on the partnerships piece. So I did just want to take a minute to think about what are the questions you should be asking yourself when considering a partnership, right? Regardless of funders liking to see them, things to consider or things to ask yourself are, am I working somewhere where I haven't worked before, where I'm not the trusted voice? Do I need to identify people who are trusted voices in the community that you're trying to reach to engage the community? I work with an organization who's here today, but they do education and outreach all around home ownership and home efficiency and healthy homes in the DMV area. And they work with the Hispanic community. They offer everything in Spanish. The trusted voice for them, the trusted voice for that community is usually the church. So this organization has gone out of their way to build a network of churches that they can call on for trainings to get people in the room to share information and things like that. So really thinking critically about your target audience and whether or not you are the right messenger is something that you may really want to consider if you haven't already. Another thing to consider for partnerships is, are you building on previously identified needs or plans? This information gathering piece, especially if you need to be coordinating with other organizations, it may take time. And a lot of times we're applying for a one-year project, but we know what we really need to be doing is something more programmatic, something more sustaining. So if you are only going to be working in a community for the next year or so, what is the long-term plan and vision? Are you the right person to keep moving things forward, or should we be starting to think about partnerships or establishing networks now to kind of keep the needle moving in the communities that we're targeting here? At least there's some questions I ask myself. Michelle, am I missing any kind of big ones to think through? Or does anyone else have questions that they ask themselves kind of at this phase?
Partnerships, I'm an individual.
Mm-hmm.
I live in neighborhoods, needed these resources and everything that you went for, said you had to be a nonprofit, municipalities, so on and so forth. Are partnerships critical in that way of like you have to find a partner, or what would you speak to as saying that, hey, you're the person that's trying to create change,
Mm-hmm.
that nonprofit. I don't really want to run a nonprofit looking for fiscal sponsorship, things like that. How would you approach that?
Absolutely. So that actually really ties into the next piece here, which is like, say you want to work with a new partner, but you don't know folks in this neighborhood, or you don't know a lot of times. So I do a lot of work at the like HOA scale for some of the projects that I'm doing. And a lot of times the best partners are people who live in the community who just have a passion for what you're trying to do. So how do you identify, like in your case, if you're an individual, like and you want to work on these projects, I'm assuming, how do you make yourself, like your skill set known, your willingness to partner known? I always say that if you need a partner and you don't know where to go, sometimes the funder has some good ideas. So again, talking with the funder about that piece, saying, hey, we may be weak here, we're considering finding a partner. Who have you seen? Do you recommend anybody? Should we talk to somebody? Also, Michelle and I, like, our job is really to play this connector piece. So we come out and we talk to people and we like to see what they're passionate about. So that when we get those questions, we really want to be the connector for organizations. So turn to your TCTAC hubs, that's what they're there for. And then groups that we often talk to for partnerships. So I do a lot of training and education and outreach, and I'm really good at the curriculum building piece, but I may not really be the person who can like draw people into the room. So Maryland Municipal League, you know, like is our target audience the municipalities? Because they have a whole membership organization. Are they the ones who I should be partnering with to get the right audience into the room for things like that? So just things to kind of think through. There are resources available to you, even if to help identify partners, if you know there's a gap, but you don't know like who to fill that.
I would say as an individual,
But, yeah.
interested in working on things, like a good place for you to turn would be to look and not, what do you, like, we're talking water quality, air quality,
Mm-hmm.
Violence.
oh, violence,
Mhm.
okay.
Exigent circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
When the flood or the actual event actually happens, and when it happens, and then you're responding,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have time to go start a nonprofit. You don't have time
Right.
to go.
And nobody has time to start a
Right.
nonprofit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
other agencies that are probably already doing work, because they're probably not solving the problem that you're seeing take shape right in front of you.
Are you working by yourself, or you want, are you work, are you like at least in the volunteer level? Because it might be, maybe it might be an undertaking for you that might be, you have the drive to do it, but you do need that backing, and so it might be something where if you're volunteering with another group, you can help them apply, or even get like, they have like emergency fund grants where they literally will give you like, y'all know, like they'll
Mhm.
give you 10,000 in case an emergency happens to do something in the community. Like I guess it depends like how you want to do it. Like, do you want to do it alone, by yourself?
So I'm
or bring
homeless today
somebody?
in
Mhm.
this place. I didn't know any of these things. I
Mhm.
didn't even know the symposium was happening. I just
Okay.
walked in.
Oh.
So where I'm coming from is
Mhm.
that I live in Oakland. The work is already done. We
Mhm.
did it. We figured it out. But to take the step now to substantiate the work, you cannot go and draw down those federal funds and things unless you are an organization. That's the question I'm asking.
I see.
Because you know the problem, and you know that that problem is going to come up again, and you want to see the people that are there be protected in this way. Moving forward, you have to find this partnership part, which is critical,
Mhm.
right? And that's the question I'm asking. Like,
Yeah.
how do you even approach now, like, looking at a partnership? I'm very attracted to what you're saying. I'm just very curious to understand.
Yeah.
Pro.
I think regardless of what your desired area of impact is, right? Whether it's violence, disaster response, water quality, air quality, whatever, there is probably an organization that is working on that, right? And so, looking into like who are the local organizations, start with churches, because a lot of times churches know who those contact points are. In the case of things like violence and things like that, I live in the district, and so there, a good point of contact, I think, is also, the local police station, right? Like ask them, are there groups that are working on this? In DC, they have groups that are like, violence interrupters. And so chances are there is an organization that's working on these initiatives, and chances are they're looking
For
people like
volunteers.
you,
Yeah.
because you would be a trusted voice in the community for them, right? So like you can actually be a missing link for them that they are trying to find. And so I think that that's the best place to start. And if you don't know who those organizations are, I think oftentimes the best place to go to look for solutions, especially for things like that, maybe not for like stormwater, but like for things that relate to people, specifically homelessness, food issues, all of those sorts of things, are with churches is a good place to start asking questions. And also churches can oftentimes be applicants for grants. And so
For faith-based organizations.
Mhm.
yes, a
Mhm.
faith-based organization, they are oftentimes eligible applicants for this type of funding. And so you may be able to work with the church and say, hey, let's try and do this, because they could be the applicant. So faith-based organizations are, for people-related issues, I think faith-based organizations are the number one place to start.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I moved from Oakland. Oakland defunded the police. So you can't go to the police. Police don't come from nowadays in Harlem,
Right.
right? In DC, over policing is happening. And I
Right.
think the part that I would be curious, and I've seen in DC, mostly you have to be a CBO, community-based organization, or FBO, like faith-based organization. I just be questioning which one is that component, right? But also not to be distracted of like which one is. It's
Mhm.
just curious to see like there's this huge like shift of like from where it's decentralization from all the normal circumstances to then DC where everything's federal. Right?
Well, so even in DC, there are community-based organizations that are working on those types of initiatives. So, there's still going to be, I think, I'm just saying that the police may know who those community-based organizations are, not that the police would pursue the funding, but like if you were to go to the police station and if you were to ask them, like, I live in Ward 8, who's working on this initiative there, like they could probably direct you. Or in the district, also like or anywhere actually, like your commissioner or
Councilman.
and those sorts of places can probably connect you with the entities that are working on these problems. Does that make sense?
Community
There's,
programs too.
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to push back against that because a lot of folks, we work directly with impacted communities, they don't trust the police.
No.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's the first so also to start there. And just in reference to the nonprofit stuff, and I don't know if your interest is to later start one or you work with other folks, but I think there's like this misconception that you always have to become a 501c3.
Yeah.
And,
Mhm.
you know, it's really good advice to just tell folks to get fiscal sponsorship because becoming a 501c3 requires so much legal work, I mean, federal responsibility, and so,
I don't want none of that.
Yeah.
and all of those things that most people can't and don't have the time for. And so I think fiscal sponsorship, if that is of interest to you in the future, is something to really consider. You know, I work with a Native-led organization that does incredible work, and they've been fiscally sponsored for over 10 years. And folks always assume they're a 501c3, and they wouldn't have the capacity. And just recently, they started that process
Right.
after a decade.
Yeah. I believe in Maryland, there's also an organization that is a 501c3 that you can apply through. The name of the organization isn't.
There's one in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But, so, to your point, you need a partner of
Mm,
some
yeah.
kind, and your partner needs to be an eligible
Mhm.
applicant for whatever type of funding you are looking for. And a lot of times, at least in our experience, the fiscal sponsorship, like those people are 501c3s.
Yeah, of
Um,
course. Yeah.
Mhm.
And for-profit organizations are oftentimes not eligible for this funding. So, but in either case, you're looking for a partner who can get the money to help do what you.
Who also understands this place,
Mhm.
different jurisdictions.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you start to deal with different jurisdictions, or even when I saw Maryland partner with National Lawrence Berkeley Hall, like my wife was working there. You know what I'm saying? We were involved with the Stanfords and all these groups. They're not pulling up to the cookout. When you're not pulling up to the cookout, you don't know really what's happening. And unfortunately, you're right, with experiencing those things, that is the part that I'm saying is the biggest challenge of now being down. And this place alone is living in a hotel, right? So if I specifically say that in a room, most people think, okay, why is I'm sharing it because it looks like.
Mhm.
I would have got a button-up shirt just for that. You know, but usually I'm no haircut and I'm grinding and I'm building things and trying to, you know, so I think the concern is that when you go from one state to another state, I'm in Region 3 now, I'm talking to Region 3 about Region 9. It's a very specific type of an ask that I don't think a lot of in my experience, agencies and organizations that you're going from city to municipality, they're hoping knock on the door that they'll understand it. But it becomes tough because they'll say, go back to California. If I can be in California, be in California. But then
Where do you want to do the work at? You want to do the work here or there?
well, I'm here now. I'm not leaving.
So you want to do it
I'm
here?
here.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, real quick, because Jim had a really, really good heart-to-heart these last 2 days. And what just came to mind, especially being displaced in a different area, 211 is a number to call for all resources in this area specifically also. It picks up where you are and it gives you any of those resources in an area. But then another piece for the long-term answer, if you were to partner in business, this young lady said, with a faith-based organization, Wells Fargo has a program, CUSP, Community Urban Stabilization Program. They will give faith-based and nonprofit organizations free houses and $10,000 to renovate those houses, just as long as they're creating lease purchase for low-income home ownership. And so the church, the nonprofit can use those houses as either office space or to create low-income home ownership. And where they are foreclosed homes. Wells Fargo does not want to pay the taxes at the end of the year for those homes that they're sitting on. And so they actually just give it to nonprofit faith-based organizations. And just as long as you're not flipping them, Wells Fargo will give you as many homes as you want.
What's the acronym?
CUSP, Community Urban Stabilization Program.
Community what's in
All right. There was another. Was there a question up front?
CUSP?
CUSP, Community Urban Stabilization Program.
Is it can a TikTok help be a partner?
Yes.
If you just
And
Google.
then I guess another question was, do you sometimes have more than one partner?
Absolutely.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
So depending on the funding, if there's enough funding to go around, yes, there are definitely.
And then do you, how do you decide who gets what percentage of the money, you versus the partner as a grant comes?
So what I like to do is kind of determine scope of work for each organization, like what is it that you're going to do, and then ask for, how much do you think it'll cost you to do this part of the project, and then use that as a starting point and negotiate from there.
Yeah, I mean, like you were in our last session, there's never gonna be enough money, but
Mhm.
a partner that you're paying is, in my opinion, becomes one of the first budget line items that I fill in. I mean, that said, we often have to go back to them and be like, can you think
Do we
a
have to
little
take
bit
something
off
out,
this?
or, yeah.
And so, but like, we're working on a project right now where we have 1, 2, 3, 7 partners plus ourselves. 3 of them we're paying various amounts of money to do various things, and then 4 of them are municipalities that we're working directly with, and they are not receiving money from us, but they have all contributed match to the project, and so we have 7 partners written into our project.
And then do you pay to have them help with the application and once there's the funding?
No.
No, because when.
So
you're
you
not
have to
getting
eat,
paid
you
for
have to eat the
application.
application costs,
Yeah, I mean, like,
unfortunately.
we eat the cost of writing applications as part of our job, right? So like, we just assume that part of our day-to-day work involves writing applications. What we do when we partner with organizations, especially if we are operating as a fiscal agent, because sometimes we do that for organizations, what we do is we write a percentage into them for our work. It's usually like 10% to oversee, because we're doing the writing, we're doing the reporting, we're handling all of the back end with the funder, but that's the only work we're doing. We write ourselves in for like 10% of the total cost to manage all of those things on behalf of the entity. And 10 to 15% is a normal fee for doing stuff like that.
As opposed to like a dollar amount?
Yeah.
Yeah, like when we do that, we generally look at what the overall cost of the project is, and then we say our cut would be 10%, and then we adjust the budget accordingly.
Is that considered underwriting essentially, like what y'all represent? Is that considered underwriting?
No, I mean, when we do that, we say we are acting, like in the proposal, it would say the Environmental Finance Center is acting as the fiscal agent for this application, and that's something that funders are very
Aware of, yeah. All right, I do have to move on, but there was one more.
I guess, just in reference to like the rejection letters, a lot of what I have seen lately is that they're not providing feedback, like even if you want to ask. So just, how do we, evaluate like, okay, what could have possibly been the issue? Because that is what's happening. There's so many people competing for the same
Right.
pool of money, and they don't have the capacity to provide feedback.
Well, I would say you should ask anybody.
Yeah,
Ask anyone.
yeah.
Like, they need to be offering that. It's not fair to
Yeah.
like be like no and then not tell you why, right? So I think always ask, and if they tell you no, they tell you no. Then I would say,
A lot of times they have like rankings, so you can ask for the ranking list to kind of see where you like.
where you scored or where you didn't score.
Mhm.
Another thing that like Natalia and I do sometimes, I do this a lot for groups that I work with, is if they don't get feedback or if the feedback doesn't make any sense to them, they send us their application.
That's what I was gonna say.
And tell us if you see something that
Yeah.
didn't make sense, right? And so that is
A service that we,
a
yeah.
service that we offer to people that we work with. So I think those are your 2 main. I think the other thing, like if you don't even get a score back, I think what you should do, start by doing is like sitting down, critically going through it and looking at like, did we really focus on the areas that we're gonna get the most points,
Mhm.
or, did we somehow miss a document? Like do your own critical review of it, but then see if there's somebody who, like us or.
I was gonna say, if you're in New York, are you in New York? So we have a good, our EFC up there is in Syracuse. So if you're not getting feedback from funders, I'm sure that there's someone we can connect you with to do office hours and just maybe look through the RFP, look through the application, and just be like, where were there missed opportunities here? But you should really push to get your feedback.
Even
Yeah.
when they say they don't have the capacity to provide it.
I mean, can you give us a ranking? Can you give it, yeah, like
I
something.
agree with you.
Y-
I think that after spending such an insane amount of time, and
Yes.
oftentimes their application may not be clear too. Like there's
100%, yes.
You think you're providing what they're looking for, but then they come back with something.
They
completely
define
different.
something differently than
That happens to us
all the time.
Yeah.
Like it's amazing how much that happens. The other thing I would say about that is that depending on how the funding is handled, and like so I'll go back to the Chesapeake Bay funding source, it's always, I think it's worth reaching out to those people and being like, look, this wasn't something that was offered to us, and like, we really would like to have it. We could think about changing your policy,
Mhm.
you know? Because people don't complain.
Yeah, it's
That's
true
what I was.
because-
That's what I was gonna say. Is like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like you have to be your own advocate sometimes, and it feels very annoying that you have to be your own advocate sometimes. Having been there, but that's unacceptable.
especially
That's
if
unacceptable.
you want to have an equitable
Exactly. That's just unacceptable.
I didn't want to say
Yeah.
maybe direction. I'm
You
sorry.
can say it.
I've seen where they didn't fund somebody just because they wasn't on GodStar.
Because what?
Say what?
Because they wasn't on
Oh, they weren't on
GodStar.
GuideStar?
What's that? What's that?
See, GodStar
Is a rating
Oh,
system.
Guide Star, the ranking.
But if it doesn't explicitly stay in the RFP that like this is a metric that we're using, I don't know. That does. That seems. I've never had that happen.
Review grants for EPA and USDA, and I've seen where the lead grant reviewer, so you'll have like 3
Mhm.
under grant reviewers, and then you'll have the lead grant reviewer, and you have to come as a team and
Yeah.
do the points together. And I've seen where, well, I've looked this organization up, and they're not on GodStar, so I don't really trust, even though the points lined up. It was like, I don't really trust this org.
Wow.
There's also, so this is one of the reasons why I say reach out to the funder, because they are supposed to be, in these technical review committees, they're supposed to be the person leading it, which is gonna be your program officer, and then there's gonna be other voices that are experts in the field, that work in the area, that work in the jurisdiction. The program officer's role, and not all program officers are created the same, but the program officer's role is, if you took the time to call them, to vet your idea through, to talk through things, and there is still a lack of clarity on the reviewer side, it is their role to advocate, to say, I advise them to do this because of this, which is why we always say call the funder, because that is their role in that review process. So if you're not, so put the effort in on the front end, have your questions clear, and talk through what your options are. If they recommend something, then they need to advocate. They're supposed to advocate for you in those rooms behind the scenes.
As an anecdote, it
Yeah.
happens to well-established organizations. I mean, we have been environmental finance for almost 35 years. We recently got rejected from funding from a funder that we get money from on a regular basis because the reviewer, one of the reviewers questioned our budget, and they were like, why are we giving the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland personnel dollars when they are a state organization?
We are one.
100% soft funded. We get $0 from the University of Maryland. In fact, they take 40% of every dollar
That we bring in the doors.
they
So,
take
yeah,
away from us.
yeah.
And that
Was the
grant
role.
manager should have said they're not paid by the state. They are soft funded, and they didn't. And we didn't. That's the reason we didn't get the money. And so now we have proactively started putting language into all of our proposals that says, please note, although
We are-
housed at the University of Maryland,
We are 100% soft-funded organization.
Could you park right there real quick?
Mhm.
Can you park right there? So you're saying that because that's essentially that funder is maybe some type of trust fund
Mhm.
that separate from the federal funding.
correct.
Mhm.
Y'all are not federally funded, because if you were, it would be coming from the state, and the state would be paying you to do this work. So essentially, this is all funded through.
We get all of my salary, her salary, we are paid through grants, just like if we worked at a nonprofit.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Which would be different if you were federally funded. Essentially, it would be.
Yeah. Well, we are housed within the University of Maryland,
Right.
which leads people to think that we are state.
Yes.
Employees.
We are technically.
Yes. Yeah.
We're not paid, no, we're not paid by the state. Like, our insurance comes through the state, we have state benefits, but they take 40% of every one of our dollars to pay for those benefits.
So y'all paying their light bill.
Yes.
So you
All
weren't
right.
able to remedy that because there was a misunderstanding about.
Not after the fact. We could reapply the next year and make sure that they understand that. But that's why I'm saying that is,
It's like, it
No.
happens to us, not just small.
yeah, like not being on GuideStar, not understanding that we're not state paid employees, like, it's very frustrating. But,
We
okay,
feel your pain.
yeah. Really quick, I do have to move on, but go ahead.
My quick question is
Uh-huh.
regarding deadlines. So
Mhm.
I've heard advice in a variety of ways. Like,
Okay.
say there is a deadline. I've heard folks say get your application in as quickly as possible, as early as possible. I've heard folks say take your time, do it right, and
So
feel free to go towards the end of the deadline. But again,
So-
going back to not doing it immediately before.
So there's a difference between a rolling deadline and a deadline. So a rolling deadline is you're going to be accepting applications and allocating funds along the way. And if we run out of and if we run out of money before the grant closes, then we're out of money because it's first come, first served. Versus an actual deadline, which is everything's going to be reviewed at the same time. So I think that's an important distinction to make there.
There is one deadline. Your application is due at 4 o'clock on Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's not a rolling
Right.
deadline.
Right.
Then there is no point in you applying a week after the RFP is
Sure,
dropped,
sure.
because all of those applications will be reviewed at
The same time, yep.
after the fact.
Okay.
If it is a rolling deadline, like community change grants, they started accepting applications in March, it closes in November. If it is a rolling
The
deadline,
money might run out.
then
Exactly.
yes, you should apply earlier in the process, because when that money is gone, that money is gone. You still shouldn't rush it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But if you can have your application ready for June versus having your application ready for
November.
1st, you're better off to apply in June, because there's going to be more money available. So like a rolling deadline means they review applications
As
at
they
certain
come in.
periods along the way, and they make announcements and awards along the way, and when the money's gone, the money is gone. If there is only one deadline and it's not rolling, all of the applications are reviewed at the same time, all of the money is doled out at the same
And
time.
they won't discriminate if you had yours
Nope.
submitted in the beginning versus
Correct.
In some cases, they don't even know. Like, I
Okay.
review applications for the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and when I get them, I
You
don't
have
know
no
when that
idea.
application was submitted. They just say to me, here's the 6 that you have to review. I don't see any dates on it, so I have no way of knowing when it was submitted.
All right, I have a few minutes left. We do see, but this is great discussion, and I want to power through so we can keep having this discussion. For federal dollars, such as the Community Change Grant, we're seeing a lot of times the funder providing kind of technical assistance opportunities, hand-holding, can we help you fill out all the federal forms? Can we help you put together your budget? The important thing is, if you want to take advantage of these services, they are time-consuming. So one of those things, again, we're just plan for it on the front end, because the back and forth of them understanding your work and your project and then putting together the resources is going to be a time-consuming process. So just something to think about. Once you get funding, any grant is going to have financial reporting requirements, right? So you may have to report quarterly status updates, you may have to report annual kind of status updates and spend downs and things like that. So it's worth thinking about at the beginning of a project, how are you going to be collecting the pieces of information? How are you going to be collecting your invoices, your travel, your and all of the above, right? And make sure that you're tracking those and you're deducting those as you go along and reporting on those. Federal funding, depending on how much your amount is worth, you may have to do an audit. So this is something to consider when you're looking at those larger pots of money is, do you actually have the capacity as an organization to get these audits done that are required from the federal agencies if it's more than $300,000 a year that you're getting from them? So again, I'm kind of blowing through these, but things to ask yourself and things. Here was the bidding thing that Michelle already touched on. And I'm actually going to stop here. So I was going to go through, take the steps that we learned at the beginning and go through an open RFP, but we only have about 9 minutes left and we were having a good dialogue. So if people had more questions, I was just going to pause here. And if you don't, I can keep going, but I did feel like I cut a few folks off. So were there any other questions or concerns or when we were talking about the review process or any of that?
I think to get you from somebody that works with small nonprofits,
Mm-hmm.
writing the grant isn't really, it's tedious, but it's not the most impossible thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
The
connection.
And then it's scary for some nonprofits to say, oh my God, especially if you've never worked with a federal grant before. I mean, just getting all the
Mhm.
just getting all that, SAMs.gov, all that is frustrating alone.
Mhm.
But to report, and then people who are scared, they was like, ooh, if we mess up, Fed says we want that money back if you don't report correctly. Do you guys provide the reporting as well?
So, first of all, I want to say, if you've never applied for a grant before, maybe don't start with the federal one.
Yeah. Just a little, yeah.
Get your feet wet with something small to learn the writing process, but also
The management.
reporting and the management and things like that. I would never dive headfirst, like.
But the problem is with the community change grants.
Well, correct.
Yeah.
That's the thing, they're supposed to help the small.
Correct.
There was a lot, yes.
Yeah,
There-
and I will say that, like, federal grants are challenging. Community change grant is like a whole other level of challenge. It's really, really, really big. There are federal opportunities that are not quite as behemoth as the community change grants are. In terms of what we offer, we have not really in the past done the reporting aspect of things for people, but this is a new, like, this technical assistance we are providing.
It's also new to us, yeah.
Related specifically at the moment to community change grants, but it'll be transitioning to other opportunities when that closes. It's also new to us. This is like a new technical assistance opportunity,
Right.
and so I'm not really sure
I
what's
think-
gonna happen once people start getting them.
Right.
Because we don't currently have anyone.
Because I think Jen's, yeah, I think we're written in to actually manage the funding for Overbrook if they get funded. So like,
But
I
we're
would say it would be a
we're
case,
written into that.
yeah, so I would say it's a
that
case by
we
case.
will be paid by that organization.
Right.
To manage.
To manage that aspect of
Yeah.
things for them. In terms of, like, Natalia's working with an organization, I'm working with an organization, we're not being written into those proposals. I think what we would provide them, I think, assistance, like, making sure they have everything
In
together,
place.
reviewing things for them, so, but we're not actually gonna do it, I think. But we don't know.
But we-
because this
yeah.
is new
To
for
us,
everybody,
yeah.
you know? When we write ourselves into a proposal as a fiscal
We don't.
agent, then yes, we do all of those things.
I
So,
don't know.
I don't.
Do y'all ever see any retroactive, like, support, right?
Like disaster relief?
Yeah, like, that's essentially what I'm.
Yeah.
This is retroactive. You have to move in the building, we're actually converting school buses into houses and home offices. That's what we're doing. That then became more of a community-based thing because it was initially done for us, and then it turned more community, driven because everybody in the community was like, wait, that's dope, bro. Like, let's work together. But we never formulated the status, right? So this would be more of a retroactive request, right? Do you ever see any of those kind of situations specifically around disaster relief and these kind of FEMA-based kind of mitigation applications?
I mean,
Yeah.
disaster relief is its own
Separate.
entity because the purpose is to provide money after a disaster has happened. And that's not a world that we walk in very often.
We have other people on staff that have done some of that, yeah.
We have a couple people on staff who work more with FEMA, but like even when we're working with organizations like FEMA, it's usually about resilience and resilience planning, not disaster relief. So that's not really a world that we function in. But I can say, with the exception of disaster relief, most funders will not pay for anything retroactive.
Mhm.
It's just not what they're there to do. I mean, they want to hear about what you have done retroactively
Right.
to like lead to this project, but they don't.
They won't
fund
reimburse you for
have
things that
already been
paid,
completed.
yeah.
But I don't have a good answer on terms
It's
of
all good.
Mhm.
Private foundations will give you money for that. Not all of them, but there's some of them that have like emergency fund. Emergent fund is one of them where they'll give you like what, 5 to 15 depending on what's happened. So like people who Louisiana and they realize that this is happening in Louisiana after the last unfortunate storm it has had a couple days ago.
Yeah.
They have a not super complicated as this, but it's pretty like a couple pages about what's happening, and they'll say, okay, we got $10,000 for you right here. You see the report on everything, but it's a quick. They have pots where you get quick money,
Yeah.
or not huge amounts either, and they will report on it. But it's a few foundations that have like it's like emergent funding or emergency funding application, maybe like 2 pages or something like that. But show the need, talk about what's happened. They can see the news as well.
Yeah.
See this went wrong here, and then
A lot of times
pot of money.
an emergency has to be declared, so what is the emergency that was declared that you're reacting
I
to?
think the trick is like the intermediary that y'all like serve
Mhm.
as is the part that's typically missing because they need that third party to validate that this has actually happened to you. And so quite often when you go and knock on the door, they'll say, well, when you're not here, and then 2, it'll be like, we don't do that. And then you're stuck trying to communicate on your behalf, which is the impediment that we run into.
Yeah.
And to get that funding, you will need another entity with you. They won't just give it to you.
Yeah.
By yourself. Unfortunately, as great as you are, they're still going to say like,
Yeah.
what church, even if it's like a community you're working with.
You
Like,
got that. I mean, that's
Okay.
also
Right.
Thank you, though.
I was made aware my time is up, but I'm happy to hang out for as long as you want to. I think there was a question up here.
Just a quick question. Usually after you've applied, let's say you've been given,
Mhm.
you've been told you'll get funding, what's the time frame you should think about? It probably depends on the entity again.
Yeah,
Should you wait
so,
another year?
oh, we've definitely been there before. So some is reimbursement funding. Okay, so I would say when you get your notice, you got your award, that grant agreement, the next thing that's gonna come to you is that grant agreement where the contingencies may be, if there are any contingencies. Look at that. So we work with an organization all the time where they will give you 80% of the money up front as long as you're gonna meet their reporting requirements, and they're gonna hold back that last 20% until you get your final reports, right? So that last 20% will be reimbursed to you. There are some that are strictly on a reimbursable basis. So you have to be able to upfront the costs and then you invoice them over time. So I would just say, and then
Was that your question, or was your question like how long from
award to, or notice to award.
notice to award?
Sure, it varies.
It's a lot.
And also the time from application to notification varies a lot. And like I will say, most RFPs will say like
When they'll be
they
announced.
will be announcing,
In December.
that usually means February. Like I automatically assume if they say they're going to announce in December, we're going to hear in February. And so.
That's another, yeah.
I mean, that's also something I think about when writing my timeline.
That's
like,
what I was gonna say.
realistically, if they tell me I'm gonna know that I have the money in December, I'm not gonna start
Starting
my
with-
project until February, because I need to allow myself time for them to actually
Give me the money.
notify me, give me the
Which could be
paperwork,
delayed.
Yeah.
which could be delayed. And so, like, I'm never gonna write my timeline to start immediately, because it's just the nature of the beast. It doesn't happen. But all RFPs should say whether this is cash up front or reimbursement or how that's going to work. So you should know walking into it if you're gonna, and that's something important to consider, right? Like if you need to have the money
Up front.
before you can do the project and it's a reimbursement grant, then that's something to think about, because you've gotta, if it's reimbursement, you have to be able to front the money to do work and then tell them, okay, we did this, here's the proof that we did it, I need you to send me a check for this much money. So it is something important to think about, especially for small organizations. I mean, I worked in a nonprofit where that wasn't really a problem because we had enough projects that we could, shuffle money around and we could pay things. And we worked with a lot of partners who understood, I'm gonna invoice you, but then you're gonna use that invoice to ask for your money back. So I understand you're not gonna be paying me net 30 because, and so it's a conversation you need to have with your partners as well, especially if it's a reimbursement-based grant. Most federal grants are not reimbursement, though.
I know with some of the ESCOs, they will actually do the work up front, especially with like solar on schools. They will do the work up front. You don't have to pay them, and then you pay by like the Department of Energy or something like that.
Yeah.
Now with city, I was on city council, and a lot of those grants that we got with the city had to do the work up front, and then we get the reimbursement funds later. So a lot of citizens would get mad at us, like, hey, we heard y'all just got awarded this money. Like, we're not a bank. We don't have
Yeah.
RFP, and then we pay for the project, and then we get the reimbursement.
Exactly,
Yeah. I think there's a session in here after us, right? Yeah, so we
We can talk in the hallway.
need to wrap.
We
but
have
if you have
business cards
questions,
if you need.
yeah,